It's crazy, but it's been 20 years and I can remember almost every single detail perfectly. These really tough events that happen in your life kind of imprint themselves on your brain. I was living in New York City with my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, and I worked at a record label in Midtown Manhattan at this place called Rockefeller Center, which is like, I'm sure you've seen it. It's, all these big tall buildings and stuff. I was on the F train underneath the World Trade Center when the first plane hit. So I didn't know that the first plane had hit yet. And when I got to work, all these people, the NBC television studios are right there. So when I got out of the subway station and I was walking by the NBC studios, all these people were like glued to the TVs. And at the time, I thought there was something going on with Ricky Martin, who was a big star at the time. And I thought maybe he was at the NBC studios or whatever. And then I got up to my office, and every TV in my office was on, where I worked for Elektra Records. And they were everybody was glued to TVs. I was, what's going on? And everybody was like, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center, which was like a mile away from where we are in Manhattan, maybe not even a mile. And we actually heard the second plane fly by from where we were, and it hit the second tower. And then that's when we knew something was up. And obviously at that moment, we were all glued to our TVs and in our offices and stuff like that. We had windows to the outside trying to get a sense of what was going on. It was shortly thereafter that on the news, they had reported that a plane hit the Pentagon. And when the plane hit the Pentagon, that's when I knew there was a serious attack going on in the entire country. It wasn't just New York City. There was something going on all over the country. I managed to make 2 phone calls that day. The very first one I made was to my father, who I knew was at a shop in Connecticut, and I wanted to let him know that I said, Dad, I'm okay. I'm a little bit away from where the planes hit. And then the second call I made was to my wife, and I said, I don't care what your boss says. I want to meet you downstairs. You're leaving work now. So the attacks had happened, and the entire city was a sense of chaos. We were out in the streets. Nobody was allowed to drive on the roads. Like something you felt like you were living a movie.
Okay, and you just
But not in a fun way. The cool thing we had, the best part of that day, and that day was tragic and it was awful, but the best part of that day was that every single person you ran into was willing to help you or do something to help you. So I got my wife, my best friend, who was working at another building nearby, and we walked from Midtown Manhattan to Brooklyn. And in order to do that, you have to walk through downtown Manhattan. That's where the planes had hit. And things that I will never forget the rest of my life are when we were walking towards where the planes hit, more and more police cars and military personnel started to show up. And it really did feel like you were inside of a movie, except it felt real. And the last thing you want in that moment is to be in that situation, but you're in it. And the hospitals had lined up hospital beds going all the way down the street. And everybody was bodega. You know what a bodega is? A bodega is like a little corner store. They're all over the place in New York City. Well, they started coming outside. It was a sunny day. It was like 90 degrees and it was hot. And they're coming outside. They're handing out free drinks and water to people because people were really getting like hot and thirsty in the midst of all this chaos going on. And there were thousands of us. It just looked like a marathon. Have you ever seen the New York City Marathon? There's thousands of us trying to get downtown. And they had opened up a bridge, which was the Manhattan Bridge, this big blue bridge to cross over to Brooklyn. And when we started crossing over this bridge, there's a few things I'll never forget. So when you're on the Manhattan Bridge and you look over to your right, you see downtown Manhattan, all the big, beautiful buildings and stuff, except this time it was all covered in smoke and fire. And it happened to be the same week that the U.S. Navy was in port, and the battleships were now in the harbor with the guns pointed up, ready to shoot down an airplane. And then, while we're crossing this bridge, F-16 started flying overhead, and people started like screaming and jumping to the ground to like on the bridge because they just wanted to get off the bridge because they thought maybe another plane was coming. Maybe they were going to attack the bridge this time. And it was the longest 30 minutes to get from one side of the bridge to the other for me, for all of us. We just wanted to get to the other side. And in some weird way, Brooklyn felt like safety to me because Manhattan had been destroyed in this bizarre way. Once we got to Brooklyn, the next 24 hours was nothing but watching TV and trying to get a sense of what was happening and what our response was going to be. So I remember all those details. And the days afterwards, every time you walked through a neighborhood, there were signs and flowers in front of almost every house saying, "Have you seen my husband? Have you seen my wife? Have you seen my kids?" Because so many thousands of people had died in that attack, and they all lived in our neighborhoods. I tried to one day, just 2 or 3 days later, to walk outside to play basketball in one of the courts. And as I'm dribbling the basketball, the dust from all the fires was just coming up like smoke off the ground. So after about a week of hanging around all of that, my wife and I took a train up north and got out of the city, or actually we went to Connecticut and saw my parents just to see them, just to get away from all of it. So that's a bit of my experience with it. I could tell you a lot more about the months afterwards where the bridges were mostly closed except to military tanks and jeeps everywhere. And it really did look like something out of a battle scene in a movie for a long, long time. And it wasn't until about 2 or 3 years later when things started to feel normal again.
Why did you make only 2 phone calls?
You know why? This was before cell phones. Well, cell phones were around, but not very popular. And I only made 2 phone calls because after that, you couldn't get a call out of the city. The phone lines had started to crash. There were so many million. Now think about it. There's 8 million people in New York City, and all of a sudden the entire city is like on fire and there's mass chaos going on. So everybody's calling somebody to say either I'm okay or I'm help, I need emergency. So I called my father because he could tell everybody else in my family that I was okay. And I called my wife to get her out of the building she was in so that I could try to get her to safety too.
Machine. Sal, you left a message on the answer machine at home.
I did. Oh, that's right. So I made 3 phone calls. I called mom too.
That's
but
how
I got,
we're okay.
but I got in touch with dad too because I knew dad could inform everybody. So yeah, it's 3 phone calls.
How have this attacks impacted your friends or family?
Impacted my friends or family. I can tell you that it gave us all a sense of the fragility of life. Life could be here one minute and gone the next. It really does strengthen the bonds of the people that you were with that day. And for somebody like my wife who was in advertising at the time, it gave her a new sense of perspective on her life. And she wanted to do something that had more meaning and impact. I know people that joined the military after that because they felt like they needed to serve and do something for their country. Yeah, it impacted us all in many different ways, but
Thank you.